Today, a huge earthquake off Russia's Far East prompts tsunami warnings across the Pacific Ocean, including in the US. Israel rails against the UK's move to recognise a Palestinian state. Trump's EPA targets the legal basis for tackling climate change. And a Harvard astrophysicist says an interstellar object may just be a sign we are being watched. It's Wednesday, July 30th. This is Reuters World News, bringing you everything you need to know from the front lines in 10 minutes every weekday. I'm Kim Vanel in Whanganui, New Zealand. A tsunami warning has been in effect for much of the west coast and across the Pacific Ocean after a magnitude 8.8 earthquake. It struck off Russia's far eastern Kamchatka Peninsula. Alerts in Hawaii, where there were warnings of waves reaching more than 3 meters along some coasts. Authorities there declared a state of emergency.
Get away from the beaches, get inland, and get upward. So that's our message right now.
Honolulu's Emergency Management Director, Randall Collins, while the US Coast Guard also ordered all vessels in Hawaiian harbours to evacuate. Meanwhile, in Russia, emergency workers remove rubble at a damaged kindergarten in Kamchatka Krai. The shallow earthquake damaged buildings and injured several people in the remote Russian region. Tsunami alarms sounding in coastal towns across Japan too, with some people sheltering on their roofs. Workers evacuated the stricken Fukushima nuclear plant as a precaution. The story was developing as we published the podcast, so for the very latest, head to Reuters.com or the Reuters app.
The UK will recognise the State of Palestine by the United Nations General Assembly in September.
British Prime Minister Keir Starmer warning Israel that the UK could follow in France's footsteps unless Israel ends its military campaign in Gaza and commits to peace.
I want to ensure that this plays a part in changing the conditions on the ground and making sure that that aid gets in.
If Starmer follows through, the US will be the only permanent member of the UN Security Council not to recognise a Palestinian state. Will James is following the story in London.
It's certainly designed to make everyone think again about the importance of the two-state solution. There's been an element of fatigue to what's been happening in the Gaza-Israel crisis. And I think the images of starving children have made people look at it again with fresh eyes. Starmer has said, I've calculated this to have the maximum impact. He thinks this is the moment where recognising a Palestinian state will have that effect of pushing a two-state solution back to the front of the agenda. And obviously France has come to the same conclusion too.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu responded to the move, posting on social media site X that Starmer is rewarding Hamas's monstrous terrorism and punishing its victims. A gunman who killed 4 people in a Manhattan skyscraper on Monday had been flagged by security cameras as a potential threat seconds before he burst into the building's lobby and began firing. The shooter, named as Shane Tamura, was targeting the NFL over a brain disease he blamed on football. He left a suicide note saying he held the league responsible. Rudin Management, the real estate company that owns the tower, declined to comment on the camera system and whether it prompted any immediate actions from security staff. A Republican-led congressional committee has rejected Ghislaine Maxwell's request for immunity. Maxwell, who is serving a 20-year sentence for her role in Jeffrey Epstein's sex abuse, was subpoenaed to testify privately to the House Oversight Committee. Her lawyers say she won't risk further prosecution without formal immunity. It comes amid ongoing questions about President Trump's past connections to Epstein and the handling of related records. Maxwell is also appealing her conviction to the Supreme Court. The US Central Bank is expected to keep interest rates unchanged when its two-day meeting ends today. But that's not to say there won't be a vigorous debate. One, if not two, Federal Reserve governors are widely expected to cast a rare dissent in support of lowering borrowing costs. Fed reporter Howard Schneider is here. Howard, if these two governors do dissent, how remarkable is that and why?
Well, it's become rare. People feel they have their say within the committee. At least that's the explanation often given for why there haven't been so many dissents. It would certainly mark a moment when people would wonder whether or not the president, Donald Trump, had made a step forward in his efforts to capture, in a regulatory sense, the central bank. He clearly does not like the fact that the Fed is so independent of his desires that Powell can sit there and just say, no, I'm not cutting interest rates. I was hired to tame inflation, and we just had bad inflation, and we're finally getting it under control.
US pressure to make Russia stop the war in Ukraine is spilling over into US-China trade negotiations. US Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent is warning Beijing the US could charge up to 100% tariffs on Russian oil that it tries to sell on. And he says the US won't be the only ones.
We've heard from several of our European counterparts, NATO allies, even Canada, well, Canada is in NATO, that they will be following on that. So I think anyone who buys sanctioned Russian oil should be ready for this.
Bessent was speaking after 2 days of trade talks with his Chinese counterparts in Stockholm, where the sides agreed to seek an extension of a 90-day tariff truce. President Donald Trump's approval rating has hit 40%, its lowest point of his second term, according to a new Reuters Ipsos poll. The poll finds that Americans are still concerned about his handling of the economy and immigration. People are deeply polarized, with 83% of Republicans and just 3% of Democrats approving of his performance. Australia is adding YouTube to its world-first social media ban for teenagers. The expanded ban, which also covers Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat and TikTok for anyone under 16, takes effect in December. YouTube disputes the classification and says it's a video sharing service, not social media. The Environmental Protection Agency plans to reverse the scientific finding that greenhouse gases endanger human health. It served as the legal foundation for all greenhouse gas regulations. The move, which marks the largest deregulatory action in US history, will almost certainly be challenged in the courts. Energy reporter Valerie Volkovici is in Washington. Valerie, why is the Trump administration doing this?
They feel that by removing all of these regulations, they're going to lift all these burdens for business and for industry. However, it remains to be seen whether this will be something that is of benefit to industry or not, because for many companies, they have customers that have demanded less emitting vehicles or just more environmentally friendly products. There has been kind of huge popular support for reducing emissions in some of these policies. So for business, it's not clear cut. The decision to remove the endangerment finding may or may not add regulatory certainty.
Finally, if you've ever wondered if there's anything else out there, and by that I mean alien-type stuff, Harvard astrophysicist Avi Loeb has an object for your consideration. He says an interstellar object has been found traveling near planets close to the sun, and that it is very, very rare.
So the unusual trajectory of this object offers the possibility that it might have been designed so as to have some goals of a reconnaissance mission.
He says it may end up being a comet, but we won't know until it gets closer to the sun. And for today's recommended read, how farmers in Australia, which is the world's driest inhabited continent, are defying climate doom, increasing crop yields through new agricultural techniques. We'll put a link to that story in today's podcast description. For more on any of the stories from today, check out Reuters.com or the Reuters app. Don't forget to follow us on your favourite podcast player. We'll be back tomorrow with our daily headline show.